Okay, I'd love to welcome everybody to tonight's webinar with Ben Sperry from Sperry Sales. My name is Josh Legg. I'm the class rep from Buzzards Yacht Club, and I hosted a roundtable that we did for the H class last year. So this is a series of roundtables and lectures that we're hoping to do on a yearly basis to try to bring the collective knowledge and sailing level up for all of for the entire H class and anybody that owns 12s. Um, as we go through tonight, I'm going to be monitoring the chat. This is mostly going to be Ben's show here, so I'm going to let him take it away soon. But please ask questions. That what's going to happen is he's going to give a presentation. And as you guys have questions about anything that he's talking about, feel free to write them into the chat. I will then compile those questions and ask any questions, and that will be the second part of tonight's discussion. Just wanted to thank everybody for being here. If everybody could stay muted with your video off, that would be very helpful because we are recording this and we'd like to have a great high quality recording that we can put on YouTube so that other people can watch who weren't lucky enough to be here in the moment. So on behalf of the H class, we'd love to welcome Ben Sperry from a company that I think doesn't need an introduction. A lot of us use Sperry Sails on our boats, and without further ado, Ben, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate you guys having me on, and I'm excited to be here. Oh, sorry. Um, so uh, it's a long time coming. Ken Dobler from Edgartown and I have been talking about this for a long time, or at least a year, and I'm glad that you were able to pull this together and have me on. Um, I guess just as a really to start as an introduction of myself and who I am and what my background is. I own and run Sperry Sales, and we among other things make 12 and sales for 12 and a half and canvas and so forth for 12 and a half. And it really is it's one of the original boat designs that we were really focused on back even in the beginning of the company. And so for me and for the company in general, it's it's a special class, and we really do. Um, it's as much love as it is business. Um, so what I'd like to do tonight is really sort of hit several levels of how to one, choose sails for your boat, and how to set your boat up, what other equipment you might want to consider to make your sails work better, and then the basic sort of boat setup and boat tune, and then and then of course actually sailing, and then how you would trim your sails, and what to look for, what sort of feelings are you trying to get, and how do you know if you're going fast other than passing other boats. um so and just to sort of overview, I'd like to really have an open dialogue, as we go, as opposed to me presenting and then answering questions, if that's possible, Josh. I guess really to begin, the radial cut sales, um as far as I know, we were the first to do any gaff rigged radial cut sales, and they were really just a an aha moment for me back a number of years ago. I was working on the H12. Oh, sorry.
Just
Oh,
as you could you maybe explain the difference between how the type of cut that was before radial cut
oh,
and
absolutely.
what radial cut sails actually are?
Yes. So, well, I guess I'm gonna keep going, but I will definitely address that. So in designing sails for any boat, you have sailcloth is a big part of it, but then it's also how the panels are oriented on the sail. So sailcloth comes fairly narrow. It's about 54 inches wide or 36 in many cases. So you can't make the sail all one piece of fabric. You have to sew it together with a number of panels or sections. Traditionally, sails were made cross cut or vertical cut, but the panels were oriented parallel to each other, either along the leach of the sail or more modern times, cross-cut sails, where the panels are all oriented across the sail, perpendicular to the leach or the trailing edge of the sail. We could get really deep into sailcloth technology and how cloth is woven and all that, but the bottom line is that you want to orient the fabric so you have thread line that goes up the leach of the sail with a crosscut sail, and so you need your fabric oriented 90 degrees to that. Now you can, we build lots of crosscut sails, but this aha moment was, well, why couldn't we do a radial cut? And a radial cut is a way of putting the panels together on the sail that they essentially radiate from each corner of the sail. In the case of the gaff H12 mainsail, there are 7 panels that radiate from the clew of the sail or the aft lower corner, 6 or 7 that radiate from the tack, and then same from the head. And the throat is actually a seam joint. So the benefit to doing this is that you eliminate what we call bias stretch. In a crosscut sail or in any sail in sailcloth, if you're pulling along the thread line, essentially if the force of the sail is along the thread line of the sailcloth, it won't stretch as much. If you pull the sailcloth, like similar to if you pull a piece of clothing across the grain, it's much stretchier and it's much stretchier, so it deforms as you pull. And then the same goes for a sail. Even though sailcloth is meant to be stable and sort of have as little bias stretch as possible, when you pull diagonally across these crosscut panels, you get a deformation and you get a change in shape. Josh, can you hear me okay? I've lost your video. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep you pretty in the focus.
Okay, great.
I'll be back.
So no, all good. So essentially with a radial cut sail, we're trying to eliminate bias stretch, and that's done with panels that radiate from each corner. So no matter what direction you pull on the cloth, it's lined up with thread line. So the result is a sail that is more stable, holds its shape more consistently under load, and the end result is just a shape that's built into the sail that stays put. So we came out with the radial design. Naturally, there was some hesitation. I actually had to go to Bill Harding back when we did this and the board and talk them into allowing radial cuts to be in the class, and the rest is history. So from there, we really, it really took off. We made a lot of radial cut sails, and I think that, over the last, I think 15 years, maybe, along, there's been some shaping refinement and definitely some improvements to the sails, but the basics of that sail is pretty much the same. So I don't know if I've answered the question, why is radial cut better? But that's what radial cut offers. So I guess I would pause for a moment just to sort of answer any questions related to that, if there are.
Just waiting to take a look at the chat there if anybody has any questions specifically related to radial cut. My question would just be, how common is a radial cut sail in other classes, and is it uniquely beneficial to the gaff rigged to a gaff rigged main because of, it's obviously a unique shape?
The in many one design racing classes, the sailcloth can be coated or sort of yarn tempered or much stiffer, almost like a lightweight sheet metal. The H class has a very specific rule that the cloth is to be uncoated, and so we could we could build crosscut sails that would be as good as radial cut sails if we could use a that type of fabric because it has extremely stable bias stretch. Um, but because we're using cloth that is not, it's sort of atypical for a one design class to have an uncoated dacron like we use. Like the Optis are coated dacron, really bullseyes, and you name them, they're all using a one design cloth. Where that's where the H12 is an outlier.
That's interesting. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat in case anybody
Yeah.
is writing in. And then I'm just curious, as it relates to that, do you see the it probably along in the future, things continuing down with radial cut? I mean, obviously there are people that are requesting crosscut still. Right?
Yep.
You're not exclusively making radial cut, but is your guess that the class probably continues down that path in the future?
Yeah, I think unless something changes dramatically, the radial cut sails will continue to be our primary racing, our what we provide for racing sails primarily. I haven't seen any dramatic improvements in sailcloth one way or the other, and I'm pretty happy with the results of what we're doing right now.
I did have a design related question that is probably appropriate to ask now, which is that it's interesting that you bring up an opti sail because it's a bit of a non-traditional shape as well. Across many different classes, sailmakers are able to make advancements across those classes because the basic sail shape that they're dealing with the main is the same. But we are not looking at a lot of racing boats in the world that are gaff rigged, and so I'm wondering how you and your team approach making a gaff rigged main more efficient and better for racing. I've tried to research gaff rigged main racing anything online to try to find information on how people set mains up and traditional ideas about it, and there's very little information about that. So
Yeah,
obviously, you other sailmakers can look towards high performance boats and the tip of the line sailmakers for ideas with traditional Marconi mains, but a gaff rig main is just something that isn't really used in high level sailing. So yeah, how do you guys go about actually improving the performance of a gaff rig main?
from a design standpoint, our gaff rig mains were originally designed as a to in terms of the mold and in terms of our design process, they were considered, if you looked at the software, they were just a great deal of mass bend in the design, and that would account for the offset of the throat. Um, we've for a number of years now, we purchased new software that has a gaff, you know, sort of a gaff module, if you will, so we can design gaff sails, and we don't have to just manipulate a Marconi design to fit the gaff. We actually have software that knows what a gaff is. You can plug in dimensions based on gaff. And I think, there's really probably not a lot of the typical sailmaker isn't building a lot of gaff sails. So I think that we're probably pretty unique in terms of that investment. Um, Beyond that, I mean, the only way to understand how gaff sails really work well is to make a lot of them, and that's really kind of fits in our wheelhouse pretty well, given that we're, along with being an H12 sailmaker, we're really pretty strong in the classic boat market, and there are certainly a lot more gaff sails in that market than there are in the typical race boat market.
And I guess my second question would just be, can you learn from, the way that the sailmakers who are making sails for, offshore rule or maxis or the America's Cup or something like that? Are you able to learn sort of the tip of the iceberg 2024 design principles? Are you able to apply that in any way to the 12s? I know that sounds insane, but
Well, it's not. I spend a lot of time looking at sail shape in, especially in the top boats, in the boats that are in that cutting edge range, and sail shape is just as important to a 100-year-old design as it is to a 2024 design. And there's so much R&D and sort of this modeling that's going into what they're doing that frankly, I can't even begin to go down that road. So yeah, there's a lot of really useful, uh, for me, it's visual information, like what do you want your jib to look like? I think the jib on the H12, as small as it is really a big player in making a fast boat.
for sure. Thank you for answering that. There seem to be some questions coming in the chat, and they both relate to sort of how a radial cut sail will age as compared with a crosscut sail. Will they age more slowly or more quickly? And then secondarily to that, then just as a general question, the sails that you guys are putting out now, if they're being used at a reasonable level every summer, how often do you recommend replacing them?
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's a difficult question to answer because I think that there are pretty good examples of successful campaigns with old sails, and there are just as many with brand new sails that are also doing well. So I think that, well, in terms of crosscut versus tri-radial, as much as I had hoped that radial cut sails would be twice as long lasting from a shape holding standpoint, I think that they really suffer from a very similar, after 4 or 5 seasons of regular use, you can tell the difference in the sail between when it was new and when it and now. So are they an answer to sail aging problems? No, but I think that it, well, we were just talking. I think your sales are from 2015. That's nearly 10 years. I think that our sales are pretty good for a 10-year stretch. Is not unreasonable to expect. We have plenty of clients who replace their sales as often as they can, and whether that's a psychological edge or a real edge. I, on my boat, for example, I sail a 45-foot classic boat. We're replacing sails pretty often. It's not what you want to hear, but I just I I like having fresh. I like having fresh sails. So I mean, I kind of in that camp. Um, but I really don't think that it's. I don't think that it's necessary to replace your sails every 2 years. I really think that a well cared for set of H12 sails should be. You should probably be thinking about it in 5 or 6 years if you really want an edge on the race course. I don't think that that's unreasonable. Um, I don't have a great answer. Probably not the answer you want to hear anyway.
Well, is there anything, obviously, if you're racing consistently, um, performance is an indicator. So somebody was asking in the chat, well, how do I know when my sales are starting to falter and I should think about a new set? And obviously, besides, uh, from my perspective, performance on the water against newer sails is a pretty good indicator of how you're doing. But is there anything that you can maybe see visually or notice in a tangible way to have an idea of when it might be time?
Sure, yeah. And I think that does get to one of the benefits of the of the radial sails that we're building, is that traditionally you would look at the draft of the sail, essentially, like, on a Marconi main with a crosscut, well, just a Marconi main, so you'd be looking at the draft or the curvature of the sail, similar to the curvature of an airplane wing. And you want to see, that curvature, want the deepest part of that curve. Um, and I hope I'm explaining it in a way that everyone's getting, but um, the curvature wants to be roughly 40%, the deepest part of that curve, about 40% back from the leading edge. Now in a gaff, it's a complicated curve because the throat really offsets from a percentage standpoint. But long story short, you're looking for a relatively round curve, almost spherical curve, and it wants to be smooth. You want to see, many sails that we build will have a draft stripe, and that's really one of the best indicators. If you look at your draft stripe, it's going apart across a part of the sail. You really want to see a consistent, cylindrical, even curve from luff to leech. Many sails, as they age, the leech of the main especially will sort of hook and hook to windward a little bit. To some degree, that can be fixed with sort of unstitching the tape that finishes along that edge and putting it back together. But what's happening is your sail is stretching a little bit, and the tape, that the finishing tape isn't. It's a little more elastic. So a hook in the leech is a pretty good indicator of a sail that's been used and is sort of it's sails don't stretch everywhere. They stretch sort of typically in 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 ways that affect the shape more than like if you measure a sail that's 10 years old, it isn't going to be bigger than when it started. It's probably going to be smaller because it's like a bag of chips that you crumpled up and you try and flatten it back out. It just never gets back out to that full size. Um, but I look at that shape, and you want to see a smooth curvature. You don't want to see any hooking in the leech. Like I said, the leech hook can be worked on. After a few seasons, I think it's not a bad idea to get your main back in for a little tune up that way.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful. There's one more question just about sort of radial sails specifically, which is older crosscut sails or just older sails in general used to have reef points in them pretty often. Reef points seem to not exist quite as much anymore. The question is, does a radial cut interact with reefing the sail? And do you think that it's ever advantageous to reef a Herreshoff 12 main?
Um, it's a great question. I don't have direct personal knowledge of how the boat behaves with the reef. I'm only going on assumptions. I do think that from a seamanship standpoint and from a, you know, just basic like sail handling and knowing how to sail your boat, knowing how to reef is an important thing to understand at least. Um, if you look at the fleets, there are very few people who reef, and there are very few people who have reefs in their sails. Um, I think that the rig, full main and jib, has a pretty wide range, and when you get to that edge, racing is many times canceled. So, is it totally necessary to have a reef? Maybe not, but we've seen a little bit of a push from some folks in at Beverly Yacht Club to have reefs in their sails. I think they had one particularly windy regatta, and they really would have been happier with reefs in probably. So it's a really good question. I don't have an I don't have a sorry. Well, uh, I don't have a perfect answer for it.
Right.
In terms of the radial cut and reefs, though, the reef is not the sail is not designed with a radial corner coming from the reef, so you don't have the same structure in the sail from the reefing point up through the rest of the sail. However, um, it is no worse than if you reef a crosscut sail. Frankly, it's you have the same issues as you would on a crosscut sail, and I would not dissuade people from putting a reef in their radial cut sail.
One thing, just as a side note, that I'd never thought of, but in my research, just looking at Reddit or other places where people were discussing gaff rig sails, literally lowering the gaff reduces the sail area very significantly if you lower the gaff a lot. And I guess that traditionally there have been gaff rigged sailors who treat that as a reefing as a reef in heavy conditions. Not saying that that would work racing or anything, but in a pinch, that is a pretty quick way to reduce a lot of sail area in heavy breeze.
Yeah, it sort of depowers. I think they called that scandalizing the main.
I like that. Okay, so cool. That's all the questions we have specifically about the evolution into radial cut
Great.
and how you're designing them at this point. So would love to move on to uh, how we actually use them.
Super. So I guess to start, I would look at when you step on your boat, you know, what are the first things you look at, and then how do you how do you install your sails? How do you bend your sails on effectively? Um, so I like to start with a quick check of the rig. It's a very, very simple rig. You have you have two shrouds and a forestay. There's really not much to it. But what you want is for the mast to be straight up and down, sort of even port and starboard. So I like to take a halyard, pull it down to the chain plate where the port or starboard shrouds are, pull it tight, and then sort of make it off so that halyard is down to the deck, and check that the halyard goes to the same place, port and starboard. One note on the H12 is not all of the halyards will do this very well, and it really depends a little bit boat to boat. I think the jib halyard works best for that. But you're trying to make sure that the mast is straight and in the middle. Um, and then for tension, we like to first ease the tension in the shrouds, port and starboard shrouds, and take up on the forestay until the mast is essentially vertical. We've in some cases recommended that you tighten the forestay as much as possible, but what I found is that some people don't have a forestay that's shorter than say the standard dotish, and they'll actually pull the mast forward too far. So you'd like to just make sure your mast is vertical, and then add tension to your shrouds evenly until I like to say that if you hold your shroud in your hand, you can turn about a 3 inch radius turn by sort of tugging on the shroud and rotating it. So it's not an ultra precise method for tension tuning the rig, but you do need some tension, and I think that there's definitely some work to do in terms of understanding how much effect a loose rig will have versus a tight rig, and but that's where I start. Really, the most critical thing is how the sails are set up on the spars, how the hoops are tied or fastened to the sail, and then even more importantly, how the gaff and foot of the main are laced and fastened. Um, I will generally start with the foot, and let's assume that you're lacing the sails and you don't have a sail track on the boom. You want to fasten the tack right up as tightly to the fitting that it ties to as possible. Some boats do have a pin for the tack, but many are tied, and you want to tie them tight up against. There's like a little eye at the gooseneck. Tie the tack in, and then I give it a very sort of light to medium amount of outhaul right away, without any lacing being done on the along the boom on the boat. I'll then lace the sail to the boom by tying the lace line in at the tack. You could also tie it at the clew. This could be done either way, but I typically would tie it to the tack. You want to go. There are grommets in the foot of the sail, that you're lacing grommets. So you'll go from the tack of the sail, the corner of the sail. You'll go back to the first grommet, through the grommet, around the boom, and back through the grommet. So you'll create, if you're looking at your lace line, it goes along the sail, around the boom, and back through the grommet. Not a spiral lace, but an actual like T lace or L lace. So you'll go through the grommet, around the boom, back through the grommet, along the sail. You'll notice that you'll be on starboard side of the sail. You'll go around, and then you're going to be on port side, and then on starboard side. And this is essentially locking each of these lacings onto the boom. After I have I've laced through all the grommets, I go back then and I fine tune my lacing. I go and I hold the sail against, so it's touching the top of the boom and standing up vertically from the edge of the boom, and make sure that my lace line is just the right length so it stays right there. You don't want it to be tight so the sail is pressed against the boom. You don't want it to be loose so the sail comes up away from the boom. You want it to just hold the sail right on the boom. And again, this is with medium to light outhaul. So I'll go through and I'll adjust the tension, hold the sail, adjust the tension, and just go through all those grommets, and then I'll make that line off. And that's probably good enough, but I'll leave the lace lines kind of unfinished at this point, just tied and made off enough so they don't move. Then the head of the sail, along the gaff is one of the really critical components because the tension is difficult to judge. When you tie the head of the sail onto the gaff, it's done the same way as it is along the outhaul. Very light tension, and run your lace line similarly with the edge of the sail, along the sail, around the boom, along the sail, around the boom, or gaff is. But the outhaul, or the tension along the head of the sail, must be much looser than along the foot of the sail. This isn't, you don't want it super loose while you're sailing, but what happens is when you raise the sail and get your throat halyard tight. When your throat halyard's tight and then you peak the sail up, you're actually adding tension to the edge of the sail along the gaff, because of the way that the throat moves when tension is added. So I get the outhaul done and lace the boom, and I lace up the head, and all the hoops are tied on fairly close to the hoop. So the sail is pretty close to the hoop, maybe a half inch from the hoop. And then I raise the sail. I get your throat halyard nice and tight, peak it up until the sail shows a little bit of a wrinkle from the tack to the head of the sail, and I take a really close look at the head of the sail. If it looks like the head of the sail has a lot of tension in it, like if the outhaul along the boom appears to be tight, you might want to ease that tension. You can expect to see some slack in the sail when it's at rest before it's raised. I assume that there are some questions that'll come from this, and I think it's really important to sort of understand the the way that tension, the what happens when the sail is too tight along the gaff and what to look for there.
Yeah, so there are some questions coming in, but I think maybe the best first start there, because they're along those lines, is could you elaborate a little bit more on what, I think you did a really good job explaining the basic setup, but can you start to explain what to look for, like maybe common mistakes that somebody might make, and how can you tell if you're making that mistake?
Sure. The outhaul along the boom is really pretty straightforward. I think there's some good arguments for a loose outhaul or a tight outhaul depending on conditions. I think for flat water with a decent breeze, the outhaul can be fairly tight and flat, keeping the sail nice and clean and flat. For choppier water, I think that it's nice to have a looser outhaul, and you might even get some scalloping between grommets along the foot. That's really going to be you're going to want to play with that and get a feel for how the boat responds to it. That one is a lot more like your typical boat. The head of the sail, if that's over tensioned, you'll many times see a dramatic sort of bend in the gaff. I think that some gaffs have broken as a result of too much tension up there. So if you're over tensioned on the head of the sail, you'll see that the cloth is tight, one, and you'll also see excessive bending in the gaff. Um, Going back to sort of the basics of what you want to see when the sail is up and hoisted and you're sailing, um, whether it's windy or really light, what you're trying to do is get the sail to assume its flying shape. There's a shape that's built into that sail, like a mold. And it takes a lot more tension to keep it in that shape when it's windy than it does when it's light. And you shouldn't have to adjust the head of the sail to accommodate for this, but you do need to adjust your halyard tension to, you know, to maintain the shape of the sail that you're looking for. Um,
Great.
the other big one that you want to look for is in the throat halyard. Um, there are two things. One, throat halyards really need to be low stretch material. It's it's really hard to maintain good sail shape with a throat halyard that stretches. The other halyards, I like to have low stretch halyards all across the board, but the throat halyard is just a real difficult thing to manage if it's stretchy material, because the you have to ease the peak halyard in order to get it tight again, and the peak halyard directly opposes the throat halyard. So the more peak halyard tension you add, the more the throat halyard stretches, and it's just this sort of vicious back and forth. So if you have a really low stretch throat halyard, you get your throat tight and it kind of stays where you put it, and that's a really helpful bit of gear if you don't already have it.
Is it possible to over tension your throat? We had during our roundtable last year, there was a lot of discuss. That was a specific piece that a lot of the top sailors from each club were discussing, is how they, especially in breeze, how they're handling their throat. And there's a lot of discussion sort of just about going as hard as you can. Is it possible to overtension the throat? How might you know that? And is there something you can look for there?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have the typical setup, um, with your throat halyard to a cleat on the bulkhead, um, you got to put a quite a bit of tension on there. I'm 6'5", 200 and some odd pounds, so if I want to put all of my might into it, I might break something. But I think it's quite a bit of force that it takes to make the throat tight enough. I have seen winches mounted to the bulkhead. In that case, I would say it's absolutely possible to overtension it. I don't. You don't want to stretch the sail to a point where you're deforming it. The sail is designed to take some tension there, and actually, all you're doing with the throat halyard tension is you're balancing it against the peak. The sail, when your sail's up and drawing and your sheets on, and like you've just put a whole bunch of throat halyard tension on, and if you go and feel the luff, it's not that tight because that peak halyard is just pushing right back against it. So you're really just fighting the peak halyard with the throat halyard. It's not so much that you're trying to make the sail ultra tight. You're trying to keep the sail. You want to stretch the sail to the point where it's taut, and that's it. The trouble is with throat halyard, you have to get it really tight to keep it in that spot.
Great, thank you. So there's a couple questions asking specifically about uh, lace line for the gaff and for the boom. If you have any suggestions on what type of line is the best. And then there was a specific question asking about lacing the sail to the gaff at the throat. It just says, can you talk about how you lace the throat on?
Yes, that's a good question. So at the throat of the sail, typically there are four holes in the gaff. Um, I've found that using all four holes is okay. I go, I I think typically I'm tying like a clove hitch to the throat of the sail to that grommet. I pass my lace line up through through like let's say the starboard side forward hole in the gaff. Then I go back down through and I go back through the corner of the sail, and then I go back up through another hole and back down. And then I'm gonna do like a get that nice and taut and do sort of a hitch around that whole bundle. And that sort of pulls the throat up near those holes and keeps the throat tight to the gaff. Um, it's important to raise and lower your sail while you're sitting at the mooring or the dock and look at how the edges of the sail travel up the mast. Like for example, if when you look up the mast, you want the luff of the sail to follow the mast all the way to the throat. If it looks like the throat is a little bit aft, you need to pull it forward by getting it tighter to the holes or just using your forward holes. It's very possible that from one boat to the other there are variations, so you really want to like put a critical eye on the left of the sail, and if you're seeing for example uh, a wrinkle that comes from a grommet that's near the throat but not at the throat, you might need the throat to go be pulled further into that corner. um Similarly, if you're seeing like you really just don't want to see any noise there, it needs to be a clean parallel. The left of the sail wants to be parallel to the mast along all the hoops and right up to the throat and then up to the head from there. But in answer to your question, I tie it pretty tight.
Yeah. Would you use the same lace line technique for the jib boom? As
For
far
the
as I think he's talking about the T loops rather than
Sure.
the spiral.
No, the jib boom I just do a spiral. If the rules didn't insist that we have a lace line there, I wouldn't use it. That sail set's just fine as a loose footed sail. Um, I think recent rules sort of iterations have implied that you really need to have the foot of the sail maintain, say, a half inch from the boom from the jib club. So when I lace that sail, I'm very easy on the outhaul, not a lot of tension at all. It might have an inch of play or so, and then I do a fairly loose lace, and I really don't want to restrict the foot of the sail too much or make it over tight.
Yeah, I could just say, I mean, if somebody with a lot of knowledge, I know Terry Kronberg is in this chat. If somebody wants to type in the chat what the actual H class rule is, we could say it on the video here, but otherwise I think what you said is pretty close to what the rule is. So I think we can move on from there. So that's actually all the questions that are in the chat right now.
Great.
Was there another section that you wanted to move on to?
So I touched on halyards. I think that, you know, one of the things when you're setting your boat up is mark your halyards. Get your throat tight and make a mark at some point at the coaming or bulkhead or some point that you can refer to. So when you have somebody helping you, or if you're in a hurry, you can pull your halyard until you see it come to that point. And that's a moving target, but at least you're close to the range. Especially true of the peak, because that halyard tends to see a little bit more in and out. Mark that halyard. Same with the jib. I mean, all these things are really, really helpful. Um, so going back to just basic setup, I mean, I'm wide open to taking questions. I think I sort of touched on that. Um, so we have marking halyards. We have sort of getting halyard tension right. Like I said, it takes quite a bit of tension to get the throat halyard tight enough. The peak halyard, though, should be adjusted so the sail does not under with the sheet tension on with main sheet. The sail should appear to be unstressed. Like when you raise your peak halyard with no main sheet on, you'll see a pretty distinct wrinkle from the tack to the head of the sail, and then with the main sheet on, it settles into the shape you're looking for. You do not want that vertical wrinkle when your main sheet is tight going upwind. You're really just trying to get that sail to the point of its flying shape where everything appears to be really natural. And the sail shows that pretty well because it's very stable, and it will wrinkle if it isn't set right. Um, so I guess sailing, upwind, maybe we'll just go over quick sail trim tip upwind first.
Yeah, the
So
only direct question that is sort of left follows into that, which is asking about different thoughts on sail shape for different conditions. So, but please
yeah,
start with just basic sail trim.
yeah. So upwind, um, it's a little challenging to describe exactly what you want to do. And maybe there's a sailor that could explain this better, because I think that the knowledge comes from mileage. But in my experience, upwind, you're looking for um, the main to be in and tight when you're actually able to point. The trouble is that you have to get the boat up and moving before you can point. I think one thing I see in sailors that are really trying to learn how to go fast on a sailboat is, you try to sort of assume the position to go upwind before the boat's moving really well through the water. So, you know, it's really helpful to, especially while you're sort of practicing and trying to get the boat going. I think it's really helpful to sort of bow down. By bow down, I mean just steer the boat off the breeze enough so it starts to develop some momentum. Ease sheets until you start to see sails that are eased too far, and then bring it back in, and then slowly, once the boat's up to speed, slowly come up as high as you can, and bring sails in with that height. You need to do this with speed, though, because if you just shoot your sails in and turn uphill, you're gonna be slow, and even though you might be pointing the right direction, you're gonna be slow. So mainsail trim should be tight. Correct me if I'm off, but I want to say that the boom is sort of just off the transom, leeward transom, corner of the transom, um, and the the indicators I like to use as far as like both trim and how high can I steer. I think that the telltales that are in the sort of the body of the mainsail up near the throat are really helpful. They they tell a pretty good story in terms of how high you can go when things are flowing. They're really, really helpful, I think, when you're reaching, and if you're sort of even broad reaching. And then the jib really needs to be set, halyard tension, so it's not over tight. really reluctant to over tighten your jib halyard. I don't think it's wrong to have a very slight scallop between the hanks on the jib. Even in a breeze, I think that over tensioning your jib can really depower that sail and add to your weather helm. So you got to follow that. But I think that, again, low stretch halyard, really great tool, because then you're not dealing with something that's moving. It's, you have it set and that's where it is. And I, I like to really try less tension on the jib and add tension and see how it feels. You'll notice the difference in it. You know, depending on the conditions, it may be beneficial to have a little less tension on the jib halyard, even sometimes when the breeze is up, just based on wave action and what the boat feels like. Weather helm on the H12 is the biggest speed killer as far as I can tell. And anything that you do to mitigate the weather helm, I think, is a really helpful sort of tool for going faster.
That's really
Um,
helpful. Just to open it up, the chat's open, guys, if you want to ask any questions now, specifically about sail trim. Besides, I mean, you're talking a lot about sort of like the native shape of the main specifically, and just a lot of setup can be simplified in making sure that the sail is taking the shape that it's intended to have. Um, is that a good rule of thumb, both in light wind and heavy wind? Obviously, the breezier it is, the more that you're going to have to tension some of the halyards in order to keep that shape. As the more windy it gets, the more that you're going to have the creases that form, in one direction. And so is there anything in addition to that you would recommend as far as light breeze or heavy breeze, or perhaps also a lot of chop? These boats like to stop and chop.
yeah, yeah. I learned, and again, it's um, I'm going by observing other sailors, and you know I spent some time sailing down in Shelter Island a few years back, and I noticed that, I mean, the outhauls on their mainsails were really loose. I mean, the foot of the sail was all over the place, and it I was at first kind of scratched my head, and then I realized, a lot of times they're sailing in, maybe 10 knots of wind with powerboat wakes and a lot of just sort of disturbed water. And I think that that was a really productive way to sort of deal with chop um, in their condition set. I think it's totally different when you have big breeze and chop, though. That is so much more about keeping the boat engaged in the wave action. Really, I mean, you've got to be able to steer to the waves, and when you have to get your bow down, you've got to ease your main a little bit to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to be really fighting the boat. It's kind of locked in, and if you have with weather helm, that main is the thing. If you want to get to the top mark and ease your main and get around the top mark of a race course, the best way to get that boat to turn is to dump your main, because you're not going to be able to steer the boat down without dumping the main. Same at the bottom. If you want the boat to round up, as you make that turn, that main should be coming in hard. That will drive the boat through the turn. Um, so it's the same steering in chop with big breeze. I think you gotta be conscious of where your main's set, and are you trying to stay up, or do you need more flexibility to come down? I think that probably, and you would know better than me, Josh, but probably in big breeze with big chop, you run the main a little bit looser than you would in flat water, sheet wise, just so you have
Yeah,
that
there's a lot of
flexibility.
playing. You have to in breeze, you got to play it a lot because you'll run into situations where yeah, I mean it's like any boat. The breezier it is, the more that you have to play the main a lot. But it is a good question. There are actually a couple people asking specifically about weather helm, because I think that is something that people deal with a lot of trouble, especially in breeze. And so you had mentioned, which I found super interesting, the idea of if you don't have your jib halyard all the way tensioned, sometimes that can depower if it's over tensioned, it can depower the jib, which will increase weather helm. So in addition to the idea of not having your jib halyard over tensioned, are there other things that you can do to reduce weather helm besides obviously easing your main? You know, most of the higher level sailors sail in breeze with a pretty significant bubble at the luff of the main. But
Yep.
is there anything else you can do to combat that?
I mean, I think that's kind of the with the tools that we have for the boat. That is more or less what you can do. I do think that more outhaul tension in big breeze makes some sense. Um, I don't have a lot of direct experience myself trying to make those boats go in big breeze, in a fleet. So
A boom vang would help.
sure, yeah, or and I'm sure a Cunningham would come in really handy.
Yes.
Uh, because a lot of these things come back to, do you have enough throat halyard tension to withstand the amount of peak that you have to put on? Um, it's a challenge, but to your point, I think it's let's assume that your setup is right. It's really about managing the sheet and making sure that you can keep the boat moving and keep your bow down when you need it down.
Okay, so another question that came in was asking about the sort of rule of thumb that the deepest part of the pocket of the sail is 40% aft of the luff. And there was a question of it says, as I think I'd been taught to move it further forward, is moving it forward helpful for depowering the sail while pointing high? Or as you mentioned, you know, once you're at speed and you're going into a more pointy mode, is moving the draft forward something that would be advantageous? I think we're seeing, I'll just mention this in general. If you were to ask the fleet 10 years ago if people were playing the peak halyard as a sheet while you're going upwind and doing a lot of playing with it, the answer would be no. 30 years ago, the answer would be never. And I think if you were to ask a lot of the top guys now, they would say part of this is that a lot of people actually have cam cleats attached now so that they can make adjustments very easily for the peak. But people are playing the peak significantly more now. Am I right in guessing that the peak halyard is the most significant driver of where the draft is in a gaff rig sail? And then if so, how might we be playing it as we're racing to try to improve performance?
Yeah, yeah. I think that I think what you're looking for primarily, I guess for draft is in my view is responding to the changes the changes in the rig under load. Like it loads up, the sail changes a little bit, and I think that being able to adjust for that is really helpful. When the gaff is lowered a little bit, you're you're moving the draft. You're actually flattening the sail a little bit, and you're moving the draft a little bit aft. I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that I'd love to have a little bit more direct personal experience to be able to guide you in this better. But when you move the peak up, you're building more shape more forward in the sail and you're adding leech tension. So the it might be a little counterintuitive, but I think that playing the peak halyard so you're not over peaked is probably really helpful in sort of maintaining balance in the boat.
100%. I'd like to just reiterate what you just said because I think it's really critical and it is counterintuitive. Alec was saying that he thought he had been taught that you're depowering sail by moving the draft forward by raising the peak, and the truth is that isn't quite the case, and that as the peak is down, you're actually moving the draft back, and the sail is generally flatter, which can be a depowering point. So it's just important to note that usually, with most sails, you pull on the halyards and the outhauls more, and it flattens the sail and depowers it. That is not exactly the case when it comes to the peak halyard of a gaff rigged main.
Yep, yep. And I think that some of the, you know, some of the, if you um performing in the mid range on breeze, like the 10 to 15, you'll have more tension on your halyards for that range, probably than like in terms of peak halyard. You might have more peak halyard for that than you would if it were gusting higher. Would you say?
100%. Okay, so we have a question here. It says, any trim suggestions for those of us that have Cape Cod built boats with a track on the boom? So that also relates. There are plenty of older Dodishes and original wood 12s that have a track on the boom. Uh, and yeah, Art, do you have any suggestions for that? If people have tracks on their jib boom or main boom?
The big thing about having track, I don't think the track is a disadvantage. In some cases, I think that it actually adds some stability to the rig. I find that gaffs bend less when there's track on them. Um, the trick with track is that that locks the edge of the sail in about almost an inch from the spar. So when you lace a sail on, you're lacing the sail right up against the spar. When you have track, your sail is offset a little bit. So when you're setting your sail up, um, at the throat is where I'm talking about. You want to make sure that the throat isn't pulled too far into the rigging. It's sort of the opposite problem that typically you'd have with a laced on sail. I just see when there's track involved, it's really easy to over tension the throat lacing if you have a lacing there. Um, I don't think that there's a great deal of disadvantage to the track. The track for the jib boom, I would say is the one part where I would probably not put track slides on my jib, even if I had a track on the boom, because I like to have that lacing sort of. I like to have the lacing as loose as the rules allow.
That's great. Thank you. One question I had is I know that over the years, the makers have improved the materials that they're using in the spars. I think that or maybe even just the the setup of the hook on the gaff has been changed just in talking to Valentine. But my question just in general is about gaff bend. And you mentioned that, if you are over tensioned, especially on the out haul of the gaff, you can end up with gaff bend. My question is, some amount of gaff bend seems to be unavoidable. How can you know, is there a way to have an idea of like how much is too much, or are you really looking for that gaff to be as straight as possible in sort of medium conditions as you mentioned?
Our sails are set up for about an inch of gaff bend, so it's enough that you'll see it. But it really shouldn't be a lot more than that. I think an inch to an inch and a half is kind of in the zone.
Okay, that's great. Anything about so there's a question of ideal placement for telltales. On that note, actually, maybe but you could talk about this as well. um I love using leech telltales in all boats that I sail on the main, as far as a great way to have an understanding if you're over trimmed or not. The leech telltales on a gaff rigged main, do they operate the same? Should I be looking for the same things on my leech telltales, as far as if they're curling back? Is that when it's over trimmed? And then yeah, if you could talk a little bit about placement of telltales, ideal placement.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I personally find the leech telltales to be the most useful for me off the breeze because I'm just not looking. I don't look up the leech typically if I'm driving. It's hard for me to like. That isn't a place where I focus any of my visual. That being said, I think that they're just as useful as as on a Marconi main, along the leech. Um, my preference for telltales for driving the boat are again the telltales that are sort of heads up, which would be more like the telltales up nearer to the mast on the main near the throat. Um, what you're seeing and what they're showing are two different things, but let's assume that you have a good setting. It's nice to have something to drive to, or at least in part to drive to, and I find those really helpful for driving.
Great. Anything about the jib telltale placement there? I mean,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, jib telltales, we place ours, near the luff. They should be about 8-10 inches back from the luff of the sail. And uh, that jib should be, when it's tight, the leech should have some curvature vertically. It should not be a bar tight straight leech. Upwind, you'd like to see probably 6 or 8 inches of offset in that leech curvature. And the telltales, you should really mind the telltales. The other thing is making sure that the we at least, when we first developed our tuning guide, one of the first things we say is, after you tack, push the jib club to leeward a little bit, and just get it set so you sort of build that sort of jib main slot. And that doesn't have to do with telltales so much, but it's the same idea of, that the jib is super important.
yeah, and I guess just as a rule of thumb, is there anything unique to a gaff rigged boat that causes the slot to behave in a different way than it would in a Marconi rigged boat? I mean, are you looking for sort of the similar trim between the main and the jib? Is there anything, if you were to go sailing with with somebody who's just purchased some sails and you're going down to leeward and looking at the slot, is there anything that you're looking for there in general? And then again, is there anything specific to a gaff rig boat that is different?
As far as specific to the gaff rig boat, it really it's kind of a lot of the same theory. For the H12, I think with a small non-overlapping jib, controlling the angle of the club is a big deal. And I don't know, I'm kind of at a loss on that, but being really mindful to the way that the boat responds to different jib settings, because it's the main may be twice the size, but it is no less important.
Great. No, that's super helpful. Okay, so the last question I'm seeing in the chat at the moment is just regarding the spinnaker. It's the sail we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah.
I'm curious about sort of if there's been any evolution in spinnaker design for the 12 over the years. It obviously has a very short mast given the size of the boat. And you're also, while you're sailing, we, by the way, just are almost exclusively sailing windward lewards at big regattas at this point. So I mean, I don't know, people might be curious about how to handle on a tight reach, but in general, I think on a more down angle, also because the main is such a blanket, getting the spinnaker free from that blanket so that it can be full is important. So I'm just curious if you could talk about the uniqueness of a symmetrical spinnaker with a gaff rig main presents, potentially also whether you personally think having the jib raised or lowered makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I don't have a great deal of opinion related to the jib, except that I think that it can work when it's up. We've seen it, and I don't think that it's necessarily the. What is your experience actually on that?
It's pretty, you definitely see some people try it. I would guess that the last 10 class champions all leave their jibs up all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So the one of the nice things about the H12 and the spinnaker is that we have a very long spinnaker pole relative to the size of the boat, and it enables us to keep the sail pretty free and clear. Really, I mean, you can set your pole. Your pole should be set up, from my memory, and sort of a way that I would begin is to set the pole up almost perpendicular to the forestay, so it's angled up a bit from the mast up to where it connects to the spinnaker. you can square the spinnaker back far enough that the clue, or sort of the part that the sheet is on, is pretty near the forestay. So your ability to sail pretty deep downwind is strong. One of the interesting exercises to do sailing downwind, is playing with helm, is is heeling the boat to leeward and heeling the boat to windward. And you'll notice that if you shift your weight a little bit and actually heel the boat a little bit to windward, like say the mast is 4 or 5 degrees to windward, the weather helm actually decreases and the boat will sail a straight line. Where if you heel the boat to leeward, or sort of in its natural heeling direction, you'll develop weather helm only slightly, but downwind, the boat will go essentially in a straight line if you heel it slightly to windward in moderate conditions. Um, but as far as spinnaker goes, the the size is sort of unrestricted in girth. The edges are restricted, so our sails are super full, you know, big mid girth, and and I don't I that's a place where I'd love to do some more development and see, just is there something more to be learned there that we haven't picked up on.
Great. No, that was awesome. Okay, so did you have anything else? We've been on for a little over an hour now. I'm not seeing any other questions from the chat, so this is a chance for anybody that has any additional questions for Ben to jump on. Please write down there. But was there anything else that you wanted to cover?
No, I mean, I'm starting to feel like I've been talking enough.
Well, here's
Uh,
just here's a question just from a practical standpoint and from a business standpoint. If people were interested in getting sales for this summer, is there still room to order? I know we're pretty close here. Yeah, what is your normal ordering timeline look like?
it's getting tight for certainly for the beginning of the season now. Um, but it doesn't hurt to reach out, and we almost constantly produce H12 sales. So, you know, it's it's generally better to just call. Don't assume that we can't do it, but this time of the year is definitely, our hair's on fire in about 100 different directions, not just in these boats. So
I believe it.
I wish
Well,
I had a more official line, but
no, that's okay.
but
I
make
mean,
the call. That's how.
there are a lot of classes that, do, yeah, I participate in the Harbor 20 class out here in Southern California, and they have scheduled buys with the local sailmakers, and you're also only allowed to buy sails certain amounts of, years apart. It's a little bit more of a rigid class
Yeah.
than the H class is. Well, I'd like to mention just quickly before we go that the registration is open now for this year's H-Class Nationals in Eggertown. The link is posted in the chat. Hopefully, would love to see everybody out for that. Registration will also be open for the Bill Harding Memorial Regatta at the Buzzards Yacht Club, which is 2 weekends after the H-Class Regatta. That's at Buzzards Yacht Club. So those are our two big H-Class regattas for the season. We're pretty close to splashing some boats in the water here, and everybody's really excited for the season. I just want to thank you on behalf of the whole H class. You've been a real, advocate for the class for a long time, and obviously many of our boats use your sails, which is great, and I'm sure that will be true for a long time. So this was really amazing. Just wanted to thank you again on behalf of everybody here, and looking forward to seeing you out on the water this summer.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks for having me on. It's really really good.
Cheers. Okay, take care, everybody. Good night.
Good night.